What is up, fellow photographers? I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to show you the A6000 settings that I use for photography and mainly street photography. Let's go. Okay, let's get the camera set up and let's get right into it. So we're going to open up the menu by pressing the menu button. Then we're going to go to the first tab and we're going to look at quality. I like to shoot RAW. I always shoot RAW. It's because the RAW files just have so much more data in them. Basically, I have all the data the sensor captures, which means in editing software such as Lightroom, I can get so much more out of the photos. But if you want to have photos straight out of the camera or you're not comfortable with shooting RAW, I would suggest you use Fine and you will end up with JPEG files. For image size, you want to get the most out of it. If you're going to shoot only RAW, you don't need to do this. It's automatically going to select the 24 megapixel, but this is for the JPEG. And the aspect ratio, you want to have it 3:2. If you're going to use 16:9, you're going to crop a little bit of the photo, which is a waste, of course, and you could always crop later in if you want that format. Second tab. Now we're going to look at the drive mode, and this is a little bit debatable because I like to shoot continuous shooting high, especially when I'm in the streets. And this is because we have a lot of moving subjects and it's a little bit of an uncontrollable environment. So I would end up with a little series of photos and I can choose the best one how I want the subject to look. But for single shooting, this is something when I'm in a more controlled environment, such as portrait photography, for example, or product photography. That's a good one as well. Here we have the self timer, and the self timer is, of course, if you want to get your pretty face in the picture as well, or if you're maybe going to do a long exposure shot and you don't want the vibration of you hitting the camera button to transpose to the picture. So you can press it, you have a little bit of time, let go of the camera, and the camera takes the long exposure shot. So for out on the streets, I love high continuous shooting. I don't use the flash that often, but if you want to use the little flash, you can use fill flash and just have the flash composition at 0. The red eye reduction, I always have that off. It's a long time ago since I had some problems with that, but maybe if you're going to use the flash, you're going to end up with a little bit of problems, but this is something I always do in post. Now, the focus mode. The focus mode for me is always continuous autofocus or manual focus. Often in the streets it's continuous autofocus because it's just quicker, but if I'm doing landscape photography or maybe some architecture or well, more controllable situations, I like to have manual focus. But sometimes it's also fun in uncontrollable situations to test yourself and your manual focus skills. Now the focus area is of course linked to the continuous autofocus, so I often shoot wide, but sometimes I use zone. This is where you can pinpoint a little bit where you want the focus to be, but the center is of course focus in the center or flexible spot. And for me it's always between flexible spot and wide. I have to mention I also use back button focus, but that's probably a separate video for now, but I have my focus button here and I can recomposition it later after I found the focus. But wide is good enough. Then I have the AF of the autofocus illuminator off, which is basically the little light on the front side of the camera that helps with autofocus, but that's mainly if you're in darker situations, and I don't find myself in those situations often. The autofocus drive speed, this is how fast the motor should work to autofocus or focus on something. For photography, you always want to have it fast. The only cases I can imagine you want normal or slow is if you're going to do some video and you want some kind of focus pulling autofocus effect on a particular speed. Autofocus track duration, I always have that to normal, and the exposure step I always do 0.3. If you're going to do 0.5, your exposure steps are just going to be a little bit bigger, but I love to have a little bit more control and be a little bit more precise about everything. And I think everybody would choose this one. Now the ISO, always keep it as low as possible. ISO should probably be one of your last things you want to crank up if if the situation is maybe too dark, but you're going to end up with a little bit more grainy footage. So keep it as low as possible. That's my advice. Metering mode is where the camera is judging every parameters on, and I have it to multi. It takes the whole composition or the whole frame into consideration, as opposed to have it center or on a spot. So let's have that on multi or multi. Now for the white balance, I usually use the auto white balance out on the streets. I find it to be very good in the Sony A6000, but sometimes I play around with different settings. Let's say we're in the shade, it's a cloudy day. The only controllable situations with light sources that I know and can set to the right temperatures, I use the customizable white balance, so I can set it to the exact temperature I want it to be. Now for the creative style, I have it on standard and I have the sharpness down to -2, and that's because I put a little bit sharpness back into it in post in the editing software. I find my pictures to be a little bit more sharper than when I'm not doing that. I also have a good friend of mine who shoots in -2 contrast, -2 saturation, and I think it's -3 sharpness, and it seems like he gets a little bit more dynamic range out of that. So maybe I should test that as well. Now we also want to have face detection off, of course, off. No, we want to have it on, especially on the streets. We want our autofocus to recognize faces. And all this soft skin effect, you want that off. This is also not an option in the RAW. And the color space, you want to have it to sRGB. Now SteadyShot is when you're using a lens that has SteadyShot capability. For example, the kit lens, you always want to have it on. Now for the last zebra settings, I have that off. That's something I only use when I'm filming sometimes. And the manual focus assist, this is where it zooms in when you're manually pulling focus. And that just pisses me off when I'm out in the streets, especially when I'm going around with moving subjects. But once again, in a controllable situation, this is nice to have. But like I said, for out in the streets, nah, it's pissing me off. I don't want anything to do with it. Now the focus magnification time, this is connected to the manual focus assist, how long you want it to be zoomed in or focused in. So that has no reason for me being there because I hardly ever use it. The grid line though is something very important. I like to have the rule of thirds grid, which means, let me see if I can get a little example. Now you can see the lines here, and this is for the rule of thirds. It's a good trick to improve your photography, and I'm guessing that most of you already know it. Well, sometimes I don't only use the rule of thirds, I also use the diagonal lines. And the reason for that is when I have the diagonal lines, I have a little bit more points to refer to, and this actually only when I'm shooting, for example, time lapses or hyperlapses, where I'm moving around and I want some subject to be in the same place as the picture before. Now the display button, I often shoot on the monitor, and that's where I like to have all the info. This is personal preferences, but I like to have all the info so I can quickly see how my settings are, if I need to change anything. But also, if you're a beginner, I think it's a good idea to have all the information on the screen and you can actually see what's happening. Now, this is very important for manual focusing. Peaking level, you want to put it to high, and you want to have the peaking color to red. This means when you're pulling focus and something is in focus, is going to show a red outline or highlighted in red on your viewfinder or your monitor, which one you prefer. And also, I've tested it out with a couple of friends of mine, and the red one seems, if you're a little bit colorblind, the red one still seems to be the easiest one to see. And then we're going to have to look at the finder and the monitor. This is all preferences. If you want to use the viewfinder, you're going to put it on viewfinder. Oh, that's so stupid. Of course, when I put it on viewfinder, all the information went straight to the viewfinder. You can have it on auto, which means as soon as you put your eye in front of the viewfinder, it's gonna show everything through there. But I'll keep it on monitor for now. And that's basically all there. Yeah, that's basically all there is. Now, one important thing is that I always shoot manual. I like to have full control over everything. And even for a beginner, I think it's a good idea to start off shoot manual, because as soon as you make a little adjustment, you can see how it affects the picture, and it gives you a really good understanding of what the different things do. Now, the way it's set up for me is this dial button dials the shutter speed, and if I press right and then dial it back and forth, I change the ISO, and on the right dial wheel here I have my aperture. So basically I'm playing around with the aperture and the shutter speed. I try to keep the ISO as low as possible, and this is something you just have to get used to. But it's like, you know, when you're playing a game and you don't really think about how you're playing, that's how it's going to be if you're going to put your hours into that. And that's basically all the settings that I have, and especially for taking photos out in the street, these are my recommendations. I hope you liked it, hope you learned something from it. Feel free to leave a like, feel free to subscribe and join me on this journey, and there's nothing more to say than stay safe and peace.